Unmatched. I am the director of the Osher Center at the University of Washington, Department of Family Medicine. This lecture series, the Ming Educational Series, are being funded by one of our colleagues at Department of Internal Medicine, honoring the family member Ming, and the lectures are being delivered through colleagues and friends at the Osher Center. And today we are going to have our esteemed colleague, Kelly Morrow, will be doing the presentation. But before we get to the presentation, we review a couple of slides together. Next slide. The UW Osher Center provides integrative medicine consults, integrative primary care, and acupuncture. We are hoping that we can expand our services soon to include massage and naturopathic consults, and hopefully sometime later this year or maybe next year, group visits. We bring together conventional and complementary practices in a coordinated manner to promote health, illness prevention, and healthy living. We emphasize a holistic, patient-focused approach to healthcare and wellness, treating the whole person. You can read more about the Osher Center on that link. We do live in the Department of Family Medicine at University of Washington. So if that's easier, you can go to UW, Department of Family Medicine, and you go to Osher section, you click, and there's a lot of information for you there to familiarize yourself with our center. Next. This is the series that we have planned for this year. 5 days in 5 months, May, June, July, August, and September. May 18 and June 22nd are done. They're recorded. If you're interested, you can visit our website and listen and watch the recordings. May 18 was Mom Your Brain. June 22nd was Healthy Gut and Healthy Brain. Tonight, we are going to talk about meal planning for optimal brain health. In August 22nd and September 28th, we will be having some cooking sessions, and our speakers will talk about food and supplement, and then food and mood. And after that, the chef that we have invited, Chef Jared, we will cook with us. It's a live cooking. We can all participate in our own homes, and we will go over the nutritional value of the meal that we are cooking together and the relationship of that meal into brain health, anti-inflammatory, and well-being. I really hope that you can definitely join us for the other meetings as well. Next. And I think next slide, perfect. So tonight, we are going to listen to Kelly. Kelly is a registered dietitian nutritionist and fellow of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. She has been faculty at Bastyr University since 2002, and she has supervised clinical rotations at Bastyr Center for Natural Health, and she has taught at the Department of Nutrition and Exercise Science, at the Department of Naturopathic Medicine, Midwife, and Acupuncture and East Asian Medicine. Kelly has been in private practice since 2000 and has previously worked at Evergreen Hospital in radiation oncology, the Booth Gardner Parkinson's Center, and in community health promotions. Currently, she's seeing patients at Seattle Integrative Medicine. Kelly is extremely involved in scholarly work. She's involved in various research projects and is co-editor and author of Krause and Mahan Food, and the Nutrition Care Process textbook. So with that, I would like to welcome Kelly, and I'm very excited and sitting here and listening to your presentation. There are times that Kelly will pause and invite questions. So please type your questions in the chat box that we have. And when the time is right, Kelly will be happy to answer your questions and entertain your inputs. Thank you very much. And with that, Kelly, the floor is yours. You are muted, Kelly, so you have to unmute.
I'm unmuted now. Actually, I wasn't able to unmute, so I was just sending a message. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight talking about my favorite topic, which is food and nutrition. And I'm also happy to be coming into this series during the middle, where if you listen to the first two, there was so much information that was given about dietary and lifestyle influences on the brain and the body, how the gut and the brain interact and support brain health. And so today, my goal is to talk about how we might apply some of that and what that might look like on a plate, how we might think about the different foods that we're eating and make goals, and how to make some changes in your diet if you are interested in doing that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Right, sorry about that. Okay, is that the right view that you're seeing, or do I need to choose another screen?
I think you need to choose another screen.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started then. All right, so our roadmap for today is that I want to look at exploring some of the nutrients and foods. I don't like to always separate those, but sometimes it's good to think about what are some of the components of foods that can make us optimally healthy, not only our brain, but our body. I see those from an integrative perspective, seeing how they're connected, thinking about simple and practical ways to incorporate those into your everyday diet, and then also looking at the concept of motivation and how we might support change in our own lives to improve our health.
Kelly, can you hear me?
In the previous two classes, as I mentioned, there was a lot of discussion around dietary patterns and also some lifestyle habits that can support optimal brain health. And most of them, no matter which studies we're looking at, they're typically describing patterns like a plant-based diet, meaning that the foundation of the diet is made up of foods that come from plants. That could include abundance of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, looking at things like nuts and seeds, legumes, that a diet that's made up primarily of these types of foods can not only support the body, but also the brain. So we'll review a little bit about how that works. Some of these studies also look at components like sugar. How much sugar in the diet do people eat, and how does that impact their health? The types of fats that people eat. Sometimes we end up talking about things like saturated fat, which is kind of reductionistic. It's removing that from the food, where the dietary patterns that include those types of fats, typically things like red meat, full fat dairy, butter, cream, those types of foods in excess for many people can cause some problems, not only in the body, but also in the brain. And we can also think about different types that are really supportive, such as physical activity. Multiple organizations around the world talk about 150 minutes. You might have heard that before. The World Health Organization says a minimum of 150 minutes. The Centers for Disease Control, American Heart Association, this 150 minutes is a goal. And also an amount of physical activity that seems to be supportive not only of brain health, but for overall health in our bodies. So moving our bodies is really important. When we move our bodies, we produce a compound called brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps us to build connections between the different neurons in our brain. Physical activity helps us to sleep better. It helps to improve our cardiovascular health, which improves blood flow to the brain. There's so many things that physical activity does to keep us healthy. Spending quality time with others is really important. The social aspect of life is very important for health. And one of the factors that shows up so strongly in so many studies that when people are socially isolated, that's associated with cognitive decline, with poor health outcomes. So being engaged socially in a way that works for you is something that could be very important as well. And then sleep. Sleep is something that we know more and more is incredibly important for health. When you sleep, it's kind of like when your body goes into cleanup mode, especially in your brain. Your astrocytes are part of your immune system and they sort of do their cleanup. They can remove some of the alpha-synuclein or the beta amyloid or some of those waste products that can build up and lead to inflammation and tangles in the brain. So getting a good night's sleep is also so important. And I think about all of these as almost a checklist. So thinking about your life and what you're eating and how you're living, if you were to go ahead and maybe check off the things you thought you were doing really well, which are the ones that might need a little bit of support? And that's something that you can think about as we go through this talk today, especially when we get to the part about making a goal or making a plan. If you're not eating very many whole grains, or if you are maybe eating a lot of sugar, what are some different ways that you might look at making some modifications in your diet so that you have even more check marks on this list? Or if you're not sleeping very well, you don't want to forget about the lifestyle habits.
Hey, Kelly.
I put this on here as a reminder
Kelly,
that when we're looking at many of these studies, we might be looking through this Euro focus lens, and it might seem like, well, everybody needs to be eating foods from the Mediterranean region, but we can really think about what we call heritage foods. So taking into consideration traditional diets from around the world, and also some dietary preferences, maybe like a vegetarian diet, or looking at what people are eating in different cultures. My computer is muted.
We need you to switch your display.
Okay.
So reshare it and then share the different swap the screen so it shows the entire presentation. Sorry to interrupt you.
So Kelly, from the beginning, your presentation was on the presenter mode and a view, and we couldn't, you were not hearing. I don't know what happened, but people were not seeing the whole slide. So
okay, all right. That's so nobody was able to hear everything I was saying.
They could hear it, but the slides were kind of like the presenter view. They were not the big
okay.
The PowerPoint.
Okay, so sorry about that.
If you want to change the view, we can go quickly over it. It is not a quick overview, but just go ahead, please share your slides. All
right, is this better?
Let's see. Yes, that is what we wanted. So if you want to go over your slides from the very beginning very quickly, I think that would be because people wanted to take notes. So just feel free to go slide number 1 and slide from number. Thank you.
Okay. So slide number 1, if you were able to hear me, basically I was going through the different dietary patterns and lifestyle habits that support brain health. So if you wanted to either take a screenshot, I think you're going to get a copy of this as well. So you can go ahead and take a look at the slides that you'll get as well. And then what I was talking about here is that we don't have to just take a European focus on dietary patterns that are supportive. We can look at what we call heritage foods from around the world. So these slides or these images come from the Old Ways Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes heritage foods as being a foundation for health. And as you can see, the foods that we were talking about in some of these studies that have been previously discussed in this series about eating plant-based foods, you'll see this in the foundation of all of these different dietary patterns, whether it's a Mediterranean pattern, which has quite a lot of research behind it, or looking at some of how that applies to foods from around the world and cultural food traditions. We talked about, and I'm just going to briefly review in case you weren't present for the first 2 lectures, but the Mediterranean diet has been studied for many aspects of cognitive health, emotional health, cardiovascular, metabolic. It's almost like a panacea, and everywhere you look, it seems to be helpful. Right now, I'm involved in a trial where we're looking at Mediterranean style diet, and we're calling it a Medi for All diet. So we're really trying to make it as culturally inclusive as possible for people with digestive disorders and diverticulitis. So there's many ways that the Mediterranean dietary pattern, which is inclusive of those different, that checklist that I was referring to, those are the types of foods that promote brain health and total body health. There's a newer diet that has been described, started being studied about 2015 at Harvard, called the Mind diet, which is looking at Mediterranean and combining it with what's called a DASH diet. So this is a diet that has evidence behind it for hypertension. And so it's very similar to a Mediterranean diet. It just has some more berries and it has more greens. I would say those are probably the main differences, but we find very similar types of results. And in the original research published, it was a 10-year study with over 1,000 people, and they found that the people who had the highest adherence to this type of an eating pattern had a 50% reduction in Alzheimer's symptoms, which is absolutely remarkable. Then we also have the Finnish geriatric intervention study to prevent cognitive impairment and disability. And this is a multi-domain intervention looking at not only dietary patterns, which look very, very similar to the Mediterranean pattern, the Mind pattern, but also including social activity, physical activity, cognitive training. And they also found an improvement in cognitive function, and also with the Mind diet, Mediterranean, and with this finger study, a dramatic decrease in other types of health conditions too, like cardiovascular disease and cancer and whatnot. So this is powerful information. And if we had a drug that could reduce symptoms by 50%, it would probably be something everybody would be on. And so we don't want to discount the impact of diet and lifestyle and how that can impact our total health from our brain to our body. Thinking about what that might look like on a plate, this is a handout that we would give to many of our clients at the Bastyr Clinic when I worked there for many years. And this is something that you could take and examine the foods that you're eating to see where you're meeting that pattern and where you might want to boost it up or reduce. And so I would say a foundation of this plate is looking at maybe half of it being fruits and vegetables. And people can do that in multiple ways. You can have maybe one raw and one cooked, trying to get a variety of colors, having it be something, maybe if it's a combination meal where you might have it mixed in like a stir fry or something, that it could take up, the vegetables would take up the majority of the plate. And then we have our whole grains and starches. So are they starches that have fiber in them? That helps us to keep our blood sugar balanced. Having balanced blood sugar really helps our mood. It helps our cognitive function. It's really important because that's the main source of fuel for our brain. And then proteins are also really important as well. So we make neurotransmitters, communication molecules out of proteins. So we need to make sure we have a balance of proteins. We also put in the center healthy fats. We make our cell membranes out of fats that we eat. And also we will make other types of communication molecules like prostaglandins and such that influence inflammation out of these fats as well. And then one thing that we put on here is what we call digestives. So digestives are foods that have probiotics. This is something that was talked about in the second class, where we have this connection between our brain and our gut. We have a lot of neurotransmitters that are made in our gut. There is a neurological pathway between our brain and our gut, that if our gut is healthy, it helps to promote a healthy brain. If our gut is inflamed, that can cause inflammation in our brain. And so if we are taking in these good bacteria, these beneficial bacteria, that might help reduce inflammation in our gut. It can help promote just optimal functioning of our gut, helps our immune system. It helps so many things. So having some sort of a fermented food in your meal could be a nice addition. From a culinary perspective, they also add a lot of flavor. So you might add a little bit of apple cider vinegar or miso or a pickle, or if you like sauerkraut, things like that, a little bit of yogurt and dressing. All of these can really enhance the flavor and enjoyment of food. And they can also give you the benefit of having those probiotics that help support your gut. So thinking about your plate and a meal that you might have had recently, how did it fit with this pattern? Was there an abundance of vegetables? Did you have good sources of fiber? Did you have some protein? Did you have some good fats in there? This could be a model for those patterns we just talked about that help support brain health. This is a handout that I like to give my clients from the Institute for Functional Medicine. And I think it's just a great reminder of the abundance of different types of plant-based foods that are out there. Trying to pick the colors of the rainbow. So we talked about maybe a raw and a cooked vegetable. You can also think about how many different colors can you get on your plate. And one of the reasons why we want to encourage a variety of plants is because each plant has a little something different to offer us. And humans really evolved borrowing some compounds from plants that help us to live at a higher level of health. And one of the things that we talked about during the very first class was this concept of a phytonutrient, sometimes called a phytochemical. And these phytochemicals are compounds in plants that are different from things like proteins and fats. They sound like carotenes, like maybe beta carotene or lutein or curcumin. You might have heard of some of these different compounds before. And these are often found in the colors of plants. They're also found in the aromas of plants and also in the fiber. So the colors, the aromas, the fiber of plants contain these phytonutrients that we borrow and help us to run the machinery of our body, essentially. They can help support our immune system. Some of them, like curcumin, can cross the blood-brain barrier, it can pass into the brain, and it can actually communicate with cells and tell some of the compounds in our cells to not inflame. So I don't know if I described that very well, but they can inhibit, there's a compound called NF-kappa beta that it actually can inhibit the expression of that. So one of the things these compounds do is they can regulate the way that our genes are expressed. And that can impact our health in many ways. So they can increase the way that our liver processes maybe chemicals or things that we're exposed to. Some of them are really exciting in terms of what they do in the brain. I don't know how many of you like blueberries. Blueberries are really in season right now, and they're so amazing. Blueberries have something called flavonoids and polyphenols. Those are the phytonutrients. And they have been studied quite a lot for how they might impact the brain. So one of the things they can do is those polyphenols really help to nourish the microbiome and the cells, those bacteria in our gut, which helps to keep our brain healthy. They also can help to express genes that are called longevity genes. Like one of them is called sirtuin-1. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one before. You might see it or read about it at some point. And that is called a longevity gene because what it does is it helps to reduce inflammation. It helps to protect our mitochondria, which is a compound of the cell, or it's an organelle in the cell that helps to produce energy. And it also helps to promote what's called autophagy, or this sort of cellular cleaning. So it helps our cells to get rid of waste products. So these phytochemicals are so powerful in terms of how they support our biochemistry, not only in our body, but in our brain. Another one that I think is super interesting is a mushroom called lion's mane. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of a lion's mane mushroom, but lion's mane mushroom has some of these phytonutrients that stimulate growth factors in the brain, which help to grow new connections between brain cells. And they've shown that in animals and humans. So eating a variety of plant-based foods is the reason why it's on the foundation of the recommendations is because of all of these powerful aspects. So we not only get some carbohydrates that help us have energy, we not only have the fibers, and we not only have the some proteins and fats, but we get all of these phytonutrients that really help to keep us healthy and our brain healthy as well. To me, phytonutrients are one of the most exciting aspects of nutrition. As we are putting together our meals and thinking about all of the different plant-based foods and traditional foods that we might include, I think it's important to really think about what is food. Probably is a very, very simple concept, but there's so many foods out there that are kind of masquerading as foods. Sometimes we might call them food-like substances. They're ultra-processed foods, they're partitioned, and foods that really don't contribute to our health as much. And so I thought we would kind of start at the beginning and think about how we might define food. Clearly, there's an aspect of fuel to our food. There's also an aspect of nourishment, which comes from all of those nutrients that we were talking about, like the proteins and the fats and things like that. And nourishment to me also conjures up like feelings of satisfaction. There's a supportive and regenerative aspect. So that comes from, some of the proteins and the phytonutrients. And then we can think about the psychological aspect a little further, about the connection or the comfort that food might provide us. And food can also be medicine. And wouldn't it be awesome if we could go to this kind of a pharmacy when we were sick? Actually, we can go to farmers markets and we can buy produce. But this is one of my favorite nutrition cartoons. I want to also introduce a concept that maybe you might not have thought of before, which is thinking of food as information. And you can think of that almost as if you were thinking of it as a computer program. So I think of our body not just as a machine, but I think of it as a computer, a highly sophisticated computer that's always processing information. And food is some of that information that we're processing. And so if we are eating processed foods, what kind of programs are we running in our computer? Are we putting garbled programs into our computer, and what's the effect over time? Our bodies typically can handle some of that, but if that's a lot of what we're taking in, it can really have a negative effect over time, not only on our body, but on our brain. This is an article that came out last month in the Washington Post. I think that it did a really nice job describing this concept of integrity in food. So if you're looking at the difference between an unprocessed food and an ultra processed food, you can see that with the whole food, there is a food matrix. And what is that matrix? It's a design in the food, inside that food, that holds all of those nutrients, not only the proteins and the carbohydrates, but also all of those phytonutrients, and it holds the vitamins and the minerals. It really holds everything in this package that almost fits like a lock and key into our body, so that we can break that down in a way that's useful to our body, and it preserves the integrity of the nutrients that food is delivering to us. When we highly processed foods, we can break that matrix, and some of the nutrients might be missing, maybe they might be damaged, and they're in an orientation that might just land differently in the body. And there's lots of studies that show that eating these ultra processed foods in high amounts can have a negative effect, not only on our bodies, but in our brain. It can increase inflammation and cause nutrient deficiencies. Let's define processed foods a little bit more, because some of you might be thinking, does that mean I can't eat anything that comes out of a box or a bag? And I would say that's just not practical. But I think it is a good idea to think about these types of processing methods on a spectrum. Thinking about minimally processed foods as being the ones that probably retain more of that matrix, probably retain more of the health benefits of the food. This is one of my favorite convenience foods right here, and under the minimally processed. You can see that the ingredient list, that's the main place you want to go to look for whether this is a minimally processed, highly processed, or ultra processed. And we can see red lentil flour is the only ingredient. So this is red lentil flour pasta, and very simple, minimally processed. Once we get to highly processed, we can see that there's quite a few ingredients on here that we can recognize. And I've also heard it described that if you're looking at a processed food and trying to decide if it's minimally processed or highly processed, look at the ingredient list and look for things that people just don't have in their kitchen. So it could be, things like, monoglycerides, or it could be calcium propionate. So people don't typically have those in their kitchen in that kind of form. Like, there are foods that might have monoglycerides in them and things like that. But people typically don't have a bottle of that they would pour in. A good tip off is if it has a really long list, but it doesn't always mean that it's a highly processed food. You just have to look a little bit closer. Ultra processed foods are foods where when you read the label, it's almost impossible to even know what it is unless you looked at the picture of what the food is or you knew what you were buying. So here's an example where we have something that has sugar, corn syrup, hydrogenated palm kernel oil. It has dextrin, modified cornstarch, natural and artificial flavors, yellow 5, yellow 6, carnauba wax. How many of you think you know what that might be? If you want to, you can put it in the chat. I'm sure. Nope, it's not a Twinkie. No idea. It is a candy. Yes. Those are Skittles. Yeah. So that's a very dramatic example of an ultra processed food. And those are the ones we want to really try to minimize. The highly processed foods, you want to try to find, I would say there's even a spectrum of highly processed foods as well, but eating foods that your ancestors would recognize as food is usually a pretty good barometer for reading a label. Or even reading a label and seeing if you recognize everything on there. If you don't recognize everything on there, that is a pretty good indicator. I've also heard if you see high fructose corn syrup on a label, that's like a pretty good marker immediately that it's a highly processed food. And so, obviously looking at things that people just typically don't have in their kitchen. Let's define minimally processed, because those are the ones that we want to try to gravitate towards more. These are some of the ways you can identify if it's a minimally processed food. Can you identify each ingredient on the label? Does this food have all of its original parts, or has anything been removed? Does each ingredient have an identity? So is it tied to a place in the world, a season, a culture? Does it have the capacity to spoil? This is one of my favorite ones. One of my professors when I was in school would say, if it keeps, you should throw it away, which I think is a pretty good way to think about, if you have a food that's going to last for 2 years, I mean, unless it's like a bean or a legume or like maybe a spice seed or something. But, like someone put Twinkie in the in the chat, a Twinkie could probably last for 10 years and still be edible. Well, if you'd want to eat it, you know what I'm talking about. And then would your ancestors recognize it as food? Here's a couple of examples. So this is something that is a minimally processed food that I think is a pretty reasonable snack. It's those dried apples where basically the only ingredients here, if you can see that, is apples and cinnamon. I know what all that is. I know like where it comes from and I can see it growing. And then we have this example of the Jolly Rancher, which again looks, if you didn't know that it was a Jolly Rancher, it could be anything. And it looks like a science project. Looking at the label, that's another important thing to look at when you're looking not just at the ingredients, but if you're looking at maybe the quality of the carbohydrates, the fats. You can tell a lot from looking at the ingredients. When we're looking at a label, we might see things like, this is something that many companies that produce 100% whole grain products will have this label on it from the Whole Grains Council. Because you might read whole grain flour, but it might be a mixture of whole grain and white, or it might just have a sprinkling of whole grain and they're able to put that on the label. So if it's 100% whole grain, I would look for a label like this, or I'd look for 100% whole grain. We can also look at the fiber. That's a good signature. If it's whole grain, it should have some fiber. So if you're looking at something that maybe only has 1 or 2 grams of fiber, can you find something that has more? How much sugar? So 1 teaspoon is about 4 grams of sugar. So you can think to yourself, all right, this is a half a cup. It's got, you know, a teaspoon and a half of sugar. Does that seem worth it? Would I put a teaspoon and a half of sugar in this? Thinking about the quality of fats, this is really important because when you're eating processed foods, oils can be expensive. Good quality oils can be expensive. And if it's difficult to buy them, I would say just get them in smaller quantities, keep them in the fridge, and make sure that the oils that you're eating are of good quality because we're making our cells out of those oils. So if they're highly processed with heat, if they're types of fats that are part of commercial processing where they're sort of a byproduct, those aren't necessarily going to be really nourishing for our bodies. So we want to try to be careful about those. So looking at the types of oil, and so that's usually where you'd look into the ingredient list. And then other added ingredients. So does it look like a science project essentially? So this is bread. This is like, you know, it doesn't have to necessarily be organic, but I just found this where it says whole kernel rye, whole rye flour, sunflower seeds, sea salt, yeast. Very, very simple as opposed to the previous bread that we were looking at, which has all of these ingredients, right? If you're feeling like that is a lot to take in or that it's very different than how you're eating, we're going to talk about some steps that you can take because any step that you take in the direction of eating more food with integrity, that is beneficial. And you don't have to be perfect to be healthy. So we'll talk a little bit about putting this in context because you can still eat some of these processed foods, but thinking about how to get more of the unprocessed foods in is where you're really going to see the benefits. If we break this down and look at some of the nutrients, these are some of the ones that are written about quite a bit in the literature in terms of being supportive for the brain. Omega-3 fatty acids, these are unsaturated fats that we can't make in our body. They're called essential because we can't make them. So we have to get them through the diet. And they're fairly fragile. So think about that food matrix, right? Like if you eat a flaxseed and that omega-3 is in that flaxseed, that integrity of that food matrix supports that oil so it doesn't get damaged. Whereas if you are eating, like if you're eating something, food, there's another, you know, if we're say looking at, there's actually omega-3s that you find in canola oil and things like that. But if they're heated or highly processed, that can damage the omega-3 that's in there. So thinking about ways to eat foods that have integrity so that you can get those omega-3s. And also omega-3s are really concentrated in a few types of foods like fish and seafood. And those are foods that show up in most of those studies around longevity, brain health, and overall health. Flax, chia, hemp seeds, those can all be a really great source as well. They're just naturally high in those fats. Walnuts, green leafy vegetables, those are all great sources. There's quite a few B vitamins that are important for brain health. And they're a cofactor. So they're part of the system of enzymes that we have that make energy called ATP. They help us to make neurotransmitters. They're important for dividing our DNA, making new cells, healing our cells. They've been studied with depression and anxiety and concentration, like ADHD and things like that. Very, very important. And where we get them is in that whole food matrix. So especially in whole grains and nuts and seeds, legumes, leafy greens, meats and poultry, eggs, seafood, lots of foods. Wheat germ is almost like a multivitamin for B vitamins and also minerals. Nutritional yeast is another really good source. Choline is something maybe not everybody has heard of before, but this is a compound that is found again in that food matrix, and it's found in cells. So if you eat food where the food matrix has been broken down, the choline often gets damaged. And choline is a nutrient that we use to make something called phosphatidylcholine, which is part of the cell membrane structure. It's also used to make acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter. It's also used in our liver to help process fats. Our body is pretty creative about using things in a variety of ways, but this is an essential nutrient, especially in the aging process and also when people are very young. So to preserve brain function and to grow a healthy brain. And so there are certain foods that are very high in choline, like egg yolk is actually one of the highest, but you also find it in any type of whole food, especially things like legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds. You're going to find that in there. And just to tip off, the reason why a lot of times when you hear the same kind of foods coming up, like whole grains, nuts and seeds, legumes as being so healthy, it's because they're a little package that if you plant it in the ground, it's going to grow into a plant. And so it has all of those nutrients that are needed to grow that plant. And so when we eat those, they're basically seeds, we're able to take in really concentrated source of nutrients. Magnesium is really important. That's a mineral that's part of making neurotransmitters and energy. And many of these have been studied to lower dementia and stroke risk, help to reduce blood pressure. So magnesium we find a lot in leafy greens, nuts and seeds, beans. You're going to actually see very similar foods as we go along. And I think if you focus on these food sources, they're the same ones that have been studied in the Mediterranean diet, the Mind diet, the Fingers trial, like these studies that are looking at brain health. These are the foods and the nutrients that are in them. Polyphenols we talked about in terms of phytochemicals, reducing inflammation and protecting cells. So berries, pomegranate, chocolate, green and black tea, spices like turmeric, red wine, coffee, onions, garlic. We're going to find those polyphenols. And then getting lots of fiber, high fiber carbohydrates that nourish our microbiome. So whole grains, root vegetables, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables. So again, if we look over here on the food sources, it's just reinforcing all of those foods that have been studied in those clinical trials. Let's shift gears here. We just talked about the studies and the foods, some of the nutrients. Let's talk now about how do we get those into our diets? Thinking about maybe that healthy plate. And if we're building a meal, we can look at it and say, okay, well, what am I missing here? Do I have a good source of fiber? Do I have multiple colors of fruits and vegetables? And I should say naturally occurring colors. Do I have maybe a source of fat? One of my favorite ways to add nourishing fats into food is nuts and seeds. Does my meal have maybe a digestive in there? Does it have a source of probiotics that are going to keep my gut healthy? So thinking about if you consider a meal that you've eaten and maybe something that may or may not, one of those components that may or may not be there, you can start to make a plan and say, okay, well, I'm not really eating very many vegetables. How can I get more in? So meal planning is something that is, from my perspective, working as a dietitian, a lot of people treat eating almost like an afterthought. And I don't have judgment about that, because it's not in this country, in many ways, it's not as supported to think about, like, people aren't really encouraged to think about planning their foods. And we have a very strong convenience food culture. But thinking about what you're going to eat is really valuable, because you can do some assessment around what you might be getting too much of or what you might not be getting enough of. And then you can start thinking about putting together meals that have those components that are going to give you a pattern of eating that's more similar to the pattern of people who have good mental and cognitive health. Some people find it really challenging to find the motivation. They might be tired, might feel like there's not enough time. And I think it's important to remember that if you take action, if you find a way that you can take action, that typically will help build motivation. Sometimes people wait for it to happen the other way, like, I'm going to wait for the motivation before I take action. But if you can take action on something small and get a win that you can feel like, oh, I did that, it wasn't so hard, it usually can help build that motivation. If you're thinking about wanting to make a change, bringing things into your diet that you know will be supportive, think about what really matters to you and what those benefits might be. We already talked about those a little bit earlier in the previous classes. It was mentioned as well about gut health, cognitive health, mental health, so many different ways that the different nutrients and phytochemicals can help. So thinking about the benefits, trying to bring in that positive perspective. And maybe what are the barriers? What's preventing you from doing what you want to do? This is something that speaking with a dietitian or a counselor can be really helpful as well, to help you kind of put some organization around it and help you with making a plan. But I think it's important to think about where you can find one step that you can take. I wanted to make the case for cooking, because I think this is something that is a really powerful way to affect your health. And kind of going back to this dominant culture, food culture in this country, where food can sometimes be an afterthought, or people might maybe not have the skills to cook, or that there's a lot of advertising that tries to convince people that it's really challenging, or that people might have an expectation of it needs to be something really fancy. I think if you have the, if you kind of hold it in your mind that there are ways that you can do this that are very simple and also affordable and also really enjoyable. There's just this satisfaction that most people get out of making something and eating it. That is, enjoying the food that you eat and that you make. So one of the things you can do is think about just the health value of making your own food. If you find that your skills are lacking, maybe look online. There are lots and lots of different places where you can learn how to cook online. There are also, if you have a friend who is a good cook, maybe see if you can cook with your friend or take a cooking class. It's also a great way to have socialization, which is great for your brain. Having some equipment in your kitchen. This is something that was talked about in the last class, thinking about how you can have a kitchen that's set up that supports you with cooking, and shifting your mindset as well. If you're finding that you're feeling like it's a burden, or that it's too time consuming, or if you're finding yourself drifting into a negative thought process around it, how can you switch that? Doing a little bit of frame shifting, where you might say, this food I'm really appreciative that I can eat this food. It's going to really nourish my body, or this tomato looks beautiful, or I really enjoy eating this food that I make. I get so much satisfaction out of it. And many times people can sort of transition into a thought process where it might even be enjoyable or relaxing to make your own food. Also, keep it simple. It doesn't need to be something that's really fancy. It could be as simple as, making a really hearty salad with some garbanzo beans, some canned garbanzo beans, and some nuts and seeds, and maybe a little bit of avocado, or maybe you have a piece of chicken or fish with some brown rice and some broccoli. Like very, very simple, picking from your protein, your carbohydrates, and your vegetables. So it can be something that doesn't take a lot of time, and by planning, it also can help cut down on some of the time. These are some of the tools that I find helpful, and other people that I've worked with have found helpful as well, to either cut down on some of the time that it takes to cook, sometimes even just making it a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit easier as well. So things like a crock pot or an Instapot. I use an air fryer all the time. I think that they make cooking so quick and easy. And I would recommend one that has stainless steel on the inside, so that you're not getting, if you're going to use it frequently, so you're not getting exposed to some of the chemicals that are in the nonstick. This is something that a number of clients that I work with, like I work a lot with people who have Parkinson's disease. And so chopping is challenging. And so this is a chopper where you can put the food on top of the metal grating, and then you push down on the top and it chops it. It's really fast. You can put it in the dishwasher. There, blenders. I think a salad spinner is so helpful as well. If you wash your vegetables and then you can spin it dry. A good knife is something that Chef Jared talked about. So finding some of those tools that can make it enjoyable and easy for you to cook is another way to sort of set yourself up for success if you're wanting to do more cooking. There's lots of different strategies and tips around meal planning, and many people that I work with might feel a little bit overwhelmed if you think about, gosh, I'm going to eat 21 meals in a week. How do I sit down and plan 21 meals? And I would recommend just taking it slowly. Maybe just starting with a few meals that you'll prepare, or maybe even one if you're not used to cooking. There are some planning tools that are out there if you like to write things down. I often recommend people use a notebook, so like a spiral notebook, or maybe like a Google Doc or something if you want to type it. And that way, if you write down what you're eating, you can kind of scroll back through or look back through to some past meals that you've had, so that it can become a little bit faster. I also recommend that you think about where you like to have the most variety in your day. For a lot of people, it's at dinner. So maybe you start with, okay, I'm going to plan 3 dinners. And you might even say, all right, one dinner is going to be a stir fry. One dinner is going to be like a protein, starch, and veg. And the other dinner is going to be a crock pot meal. Like sometimes people even break it down like that just to help give them that orientation. Just depends on, where you're starting and what's helpful for wrapping your mind around making this organization. So if you think about making a few dinners, you can take those dinners and turn them into leftovers for your lunch. So by planning 2 or 3 dinners, you've already planned 2 or 3 of your lunches. You can also think about how you might transform something from dinner. Like maybe if you had chicken and sweet potato and broccoli for dinner, maybe you turn that into a salad the next day. So you can transform some of those ingredients. But using those leftovers can sometimes be really helpful. And I've found that many people don't need that much variety for breakfast. It just depends where you want more variety. But many times people can say, you know what, I'm good with just 2 different breakfasts that I might eat for the week. And if you think about it that way, all of a sudden it's really reduced the number of things that you're planning. And you might need to plan more than once in a week, but as you get used to it, you can build on that process. And the more that you do some prep, the more you'll have some things, especially if you make a little bit extra, the more you'll have them on hand. Especially if you think about, I'm gonna pick 2 starches this week. I'm gonna pick sweet potatoes and brown rice. I'm gonna make those, and I'm gonna build my meals off of those for the week, because sometimes those take the longest to cook. So there's a variety of different ways to do it. And if it's feeling like you need some more support, working with a dietitian can be really, really helpful around that. And this is something that we use in our family too, which we keep a magnetic whiteboard on the fridge, or you could keep a notebook or something like that whenever you run out of something, to just write it down, so that you have a running list of things that you might run out of that are kind of staples. Like if you typically eat yogurt and you run out, put it on there. That way you don't forget if you go to the store, take a picture of it or write it down. But there's lots of different ways to manage this and to keep track of the different things and staples that you might have. But these are just a few of the tips and tools that when I'm seeing clients that I work with, I'm on. But there's also online systems as well. There's one website that I sometimes refer people to. It's a company called the Fresh 20. I don't work for them, but they offer meal planning help where it's only 20 ingredients for the whole week. So they'll give you the shopping list and the recipes. It's a subscription based. You can try, I think you can try it for free at first, but there are other tools like that that are available as well. So trying to figure
for Q&A.
Pardon? Oh, I just have a couple slides left. So making a goal and a plan, that's going to be one of the best ways to start to make some of those changes. So maybe you might just say, okay, I'm going to cook one meal, or I'm going to cook something from scratch, or maybe you might try a new recipe using Mind or Mediterranean ingredients. So just taking it step by step. This is something I often share with people where if you make small steps, if you look at this graph here at the bottom, if you make some small changes at first, it's not going to look like anything's changing, but over time, they're going to add up and your health trajectory is going to completely change. So keep consistent and keep thinking about small changes that you can make. So inspiration for cooking. We talked about some of these before, but Mediterranean diet recipes or Mind diet recipes or cookbooks and websites. One of my favorites is this Eating Well magazine, Mediterranean Diet Center. They have so many slides of beautiful pictures, and many of them are very easy to make, and they can be very inspirational to take a look at. The Whole Grain Council is really great for whole grains recipes, and I really love the Bean Institute. They have so many incredible recipes and ideas for how to have more beans in your diet. So these are some of the places that I go to for inspiration. And sometimes that can help if you're just scrolling through and looking. I don't know if anybody has heard of ChatGPT or has used it. This is an artificial intelligence online tool, which actually is really great for meal planning. You can ask it, what would you need to know from me to make a meal plan? Or you could say, can you give me 3 dinners using Mind diet principles that can be made in 20 minutes or less? And it will do that. You can also say, can you provide me with the recipes? Can you provide me with a shopping list? It's pretty amazing, and many people are using it for this purpose because it can really simplify the process. You could also look at what's in your fridge and say, I have these ingredients. Can you give me a simple recipe with these ingredients? And it will do it for you. So for those of you who like to do things online like this, this might be an interesting tool to try. I only have a couple more slides and wanted to highlight a few of the really special foods that can really be protective for the brain, that have quite a bit of research behind them, and talk about a few ways that you might want to incorporate them. So in the last class, We talked about, we made a chana masala, which had some turmeric in it amongst other herbs and spices. And we know that many of these herbs and spices are really powerful in terms of being anti-inflammatory, and they can help reduce inflammation in the brain. They can help with neurodegeneration, so making some of the new connections between our brain cells. And turmeric is one that has been studied as being neuroprotective, anti-inflammatory. And if you've never seen what turmeric looks like, it kind of looks like ginger. It is called a rhizome. It's part of the root structure underground of the plant. And it's got this beautiful orange color, which is that curcumin, but there are lots of other compounds in there. Plants are amazing chemists that make so many different compounds that are supportive. And when they come in that matrix, that's where we get that the benefit of everything that they have to offer. So there's lots of really great ways to take in turmeric. One of my favorites that can make it pretty consistent if you're not using it in cooking is to get a turmeric tea. I don't know if anyone's ever tried turmeric tea before, but it's pretty tasty. This company, Traditional Medicinals, makes one that's got ginger in it as well, and it's got a really nice taste to it. And if you really want a therapeutic dose, you can do 2 tea bags. So that can make it even stronger. Golden milk is another one. This is a traditional Indian recipe and a traditional Indian food. So it's often mixed with milk. It's got a lot of, it's got turmeric, and it's got some dates, and it's got some other spices in it, including black pepper, which helps the absorption. One thing to know about many of these spices is, and herbs, is that those phytonutrients actually absorb better when they're in combination with each other. So if you're isolating one phytonutrient, it doesn't seem to absorb as efficiently as if you have it in the whole food matrix. So having turmeric root, you can, this is golden milk is delicious. You can add it into smoothies. You can add it into if you're baking like muffins or things like that, or pancakes, you can add it into there. And of course, you can add it into a variety of different types of milk. That's the traditional way to use it. And adding curry powder. So curry powder can be added to eggs, rice, sauteed vegetables, smoothies, soups. You can do that with, you can add it to so many different foods. And the more that you can include turmeric, the more anti-inflammatory and brain protective benefits that you get. Another one is berries. So we already talked a little bit about blueberries and the polyphenols and some of those benefits, those longevity genes that they help to turn on. This, if you typically buy jam, one of the things you can do is make your own using berries and chia seeds. So you can use fresh or frozen. I like to get frozen because then they break down so much more easily. But if you have an abundance of fresh blueberries, this would be the time of year to do it. So berries, 2 tablespoons of chia seeds. If you wanted to, you could put a little bit of maple syrup in there or a little bit of lemon zest. We know that anytime we can add more plant-based components to a recipe, we're going to get even more phytonutrients. But if you simmer this, if you bring it to a slow boil and then turn it down, those chia seeds will give it the structure of jam, and it can be a little bit thicker, but you can use this in place of jam. You not only get a lot of fiber, but you get all the benefits of the berries. You can put it on pancakes or waffles. You can put it into oatmeal or stir it into yogurt. So there's so many different ways you can use this, and it's really delicious. Choline, that was one we talked about before. And so I thought I would share a recipe for turmeric deviled eggs. So by eating some eggs, you're going to get the richest form of choline. And so if you've ever made deviled eggs, it can be a really great snack or appetizer, or even for breakfast. This could be really amazing. So turmeric gives you the anti-inflammatory, curcumin and other compounds, plus you get the choline from the egg. So this is a super brain recipe. And then nuts and seeds. So I was just describing that nuts and seeds are such a powerhouse of nutrients. Remember, anything you can plant in the ground and it's going to grow. is going to give you a lot of nutrients. And you find a lot of phytochemicals in the skin of these different nuts and seeds as well, and also in the fiber. Plus, they're a great source of healthy fats, and we know we make cells out of those fats from the nuts and seeds. I like to keep them in jars. That way I can just open the cupboard and say, oh, I'm going to add some walnuts, or oh, I'm going to add some pecans. If you're making a plant-based meal and you want a little bit more texture, if you have beans and vegetables and you add some sort of nut or a seed, many times it can help give you a variety of textures that will be satisfying in a way that, you know, some people might say, well, I'm not really satisfied unless I have some meat. But if you try some of these different textures, sometimes that can be really satisfying. So adding the nuts and seeds into salads, stir fries, curries, grains, cooked vegetables, they definitely add some more crunch and protein. Cereal and oats, smoothies, just have them by the handful, and, you know, maybe make a veggie fruit and nut plate for a snack. There's so many different ways, and eating nuts is one of those food categories that's so important for Mediterranean diet, the Mind diet, and they're so brain supportive. And beans. I was mentioning before that I'm working on a trial right now, helping people to eat what we call a Medi for All diet. And I would say for most of the participants I'm talking to, not a lot of people eat beans. Now, granted, a lot of people have digestive issues in the trial that I'm working on, so it can be challenging if you have digestive issues. But if beans bother you, a really good way to eat them would be pureed. So like a hummus or a pureed bean soup, the more that they're broken down. And I know we were just talking about the food matrix, but it's still a whole food. It's just been, you know, pureed. You're going to actually break down that matrix when you eat it anyway. But things like hummus or bean dip can be a little bit easier if you find that you're struggling to digest beans. But beans can be made into soup. There's a way that you can take canned garbanzo beans and maybe put some taco seasoning on them and roast them in the oven, and they can be a really great snack if you want something kind of crispy. If you like chips and such, that might be a good alternative. Edamame is such a great snack. So those green soybeans that you pop out of the seed or the pod, adding them to your salads or vegetable and pasta dishes. When you're eating out in a restaurant, you can also just be a detective for vegetables on the menu and just order extra. Sometimes people won't charge you extra, or maybe they'll charge you $1 extra, but you'll get a whole bunch of extra vegetables that you didn't have to make. Eggs with black beans and salsa. The salsa or the eggs and beans taste really great together, or just have them as a side dish. But any way that you can get in more beans, you're going to be getting a great source of plant-based anti-inflammatory protein. You're going to be getting so much fiber that nourishes that microbiome, and lots of nutrients that support your brain. So the Bean Institute is great for recipes. Here's a roasted curry cauliflower with chickpeas. So easy to make if you have curry powder, a little bit of salt. You could have this with a little bit of yogurt as your digestive. So super simple, super satisfying, and then have that with, you know, some salad or veggies on the side. Could be really nice. You can make a lot of it to have for leftovers. Squeeze a little bit of lemon over the top. And then I wanted to add this last recommendation is saffron. And I wanted to add it in there because this is a brain-specific talk, and saffron has some pretty amazing phytonutrients. It actually comes from a crocus. So you might have seen, not all crocus, there's a specific type of crocus, but these stamens that come out of it, that's where you get the saffron. And saffron has some really interesting bioactive compounds that actually act as serotonin and dopamine reuptake inhibitors. So not as strong as a medication, but pretty interesting research around depression and anxiety. And you don't really even need that much of it. You can make a tea, and it's a little bit expensive if you eat it, you know, so you don't usually eat it in large quantities, but small amounts. You can make a tea out of saffron, and it can help with boosting your mood. Plus, those bioactive compounds are very anti-inflammatory, and it has a really, really amazing flavor as well. So lots of different ways that you can get those bioactive compounds in to help support your brain. Hopefully this helped you to think about some, maybe some new foods that you might try, maybe some new ideas around how you might do some meal planning. This gives you a little bit, if you want to read a little bit more about the Mind diet or the Fingers research, or the Old Ways Foundation has a really great site for all the different studies. A lot of them are on neurological health. I really like this article. It's a little bit more of like a scientific paper, but B vitamins in the brain. It's a really excellent review article about different types of B vitamins and how they help. And then Dan Buettner, who wrote the Blue Zones book, it was one of, it came out, gosh, more than 20 years ago, but the research is so compelling in terms of all of the places around the world where people are living and eating in the ways that we have been describing, and that are described in like the Mediterranean pattern and the Fingers and the Mind diet. And these are places around the world where people have unusual longevity, and not just longevity, but health into their old age years. So really inspirational and reinforcing. So thank you so much for spending your evening with me. I know it's a beautiful night. You could be doing something else. So I appreciate you being here. And if anybody has any questions, I'm open to answering those. I know we have just a few minutes left.
That's okay, Kelly. So Kelly, thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. It was a lot of information. Just letting everybody know that you will get the slides, so you can actually have the slides, you can review them. And we still have 2 more sessions. If you have questions that you think that you want to review the slides, and then you have more questions, then by all means, in the future meetings, we will kind of address those questions. Couple quick questions that are coming up here. Everybody is very grateful, so thank you. Do you have any thoughts about healthy at any weight?
Oh, health, like health at every size.
Being healthy at any weight.
Yeah, you know, there's so much research. This could be a really big conversation, so I'll try to make it brief. But there's a lot of research about weight and weight science, and clearly having a body weight that's really high, or a body weight that's really low, can, if you're talking about extreme ends of a spectrum, there are some health challenges associated with that. But there's a pretty wide spectrum of ways of being that people can be very healthy. And so if you're just looking at weight, that doesn't tell you the whole picture. It doesn't tell you if somebody has a lot of muscle mass. It doesn't tell you how healthy they are. Looking at their labs, do they have normal blood pressure? Is their blood sugar normal? What are their lifestyle habits? And so we need to have a more expanded view of how we look at people's health risks. So we know that there's a lot of flaws in terms of how the BMI was developed, or the body mass index. It's not culturally inclusive at all, and it's not gender inclusive. So we need to have a new paradigm, and there are lots of different ways to assess health. So I believe people can be healthy at a variety of shapes and sizes of bodies.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we can entertain one more question. And somebody asked, what are your thoughts about count your macros trend?
Count your macros?
Yes.
Would that have to do with, couple things that come to mind around that would be blood sugar balance, and potentially like calories and weight, satiety, those kind of things. So kind of piggybacking on what we were talking about with the health at every size, there's a way of eating that we might call more of an intuitive approach, where if you're thinking of more of like a plate model, or eating balance, like, do I have a source of protein? Do I have a source of fiber? Am I eating vegetables? Am I getting healthy fats? Like thinking about the foods that give you those. For many people, that's a way of eating that is seems to work pretty well. But there are some times where people need to be a little bit more prescriptive about how they eat. Like if you have diabetes, you need to make sure that you know how many carbohydrates you're eating. Or if you have kidney disease, you need to know how much protein you're eating, or things like that. So I think there's a lot of directions that question could go. But I would say most people if you're focusing on the quality of your food and the balance in your meals, that typically works pretty well, and it allows people to sort of flow with what they're eating. But there are some people who do need to pay attention to numbers.
Yes, absolutely right. And I totally agree. I'm more of a qualitative type of person when it comes to food than kind of like counting calories. But as you said, yes, there are certain conditions that we do count calories. Again, thank you so much, Kelly. It was wonderful. It was very rich, and I'm sure that we all learned a lot. For dear audience, there will be a questionnaire coming to you guys. Please feel free to fill it. It gives us feedback and kind of directs us to what we need to do for the next sessions to come to make it better. And thank you very much for spending your evening with us in such beautiful summer evening, and hope to see you guys in the next presentations. And thank you very much. Have a good evening. Bye now.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night. Bye.